Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare
Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances of Srila Prabhupada. Welcome devotees to our evening Bhagavad Gita circle reading program. This evening we will continue with chapter 13, verse 23. The chapter is entitled The Nature, Enjoyer, and Consciousness, and will be read and explained to us by His Grace Prakshit Prabhu from ISKCON Harrisburg. Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirveshesha Sunyavari Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadha Shivachari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna devotees, accept my humble obeisances, glories to Srila Prabhupada. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Text 23. Upadrashtanumantacha Bhata Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyukto Dehesmin Purusha Para. Translation by His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Sorry. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor who exists as overseer and permitter, and who is known as a supersoul. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is stated here that the supersoul, who is always with the individual soul, is the representation of the Supreme Lord. He is not an ordinary living entity. Because the monist philosophers take the knower of the body to be one, they think that there is no difference between the supersoul and the individual soul. To clarify this, the Lord says that he is a representation of Paramatma in every body. He is different from the individual soul. He is para, transcendental. The individual soul enjoys the activities of a particular field, but the supersoul is present not as finite enjoyer, nor as one taking part in bodily activities, but as the witness, overseer, permitter, and supreme enjoyer. His name is Paramatma, not Atma, and he is transcendental. It is distinctly clear that the Atma and Paramatma are different. The supersoul, the Paramatma, has legs and hands everywhere, but the individual soul does not. And because he is the Supreme Lord, he is present within to sanction the individual soul's desiring material enjoyment. Without the sanction of the Supreme Soul, the individual soul cannot do anything. The individual is Bhakta, or the sustained, and he is Bhukta, or the maintainer. There are innumerable living entities, and he is staying in them as a friend. The fact is that individual living entities are eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has a tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate the Supreme Nature. And because he has this tendency, he is called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can be situated either in the material energy or the spiritual energy. As long as he is conditioned by the material energy, the Supreme Lord, as his friend, the super soul, stays with him just to get him to return to the spiritual energy. The Lord is always eager to take him back to the spiritual energy, but due to his minute independence, the individual entity is continually rejecting the association of spiritual light. This misuse of independence is the cause of its material strife in the conditioned nature. The Lord, therefore, is always giving instructions from within and from without. From without, he gives instructions as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, and from within, he tries to convince him that his activities in the material world are not conducive to real happiness. Just give it up and turn your face towards me, then you will be happy, he says. Thus, the intelligent person who places his faith in the Paramatma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, begins to advance towards a blissful eternal life of knowledge. Text 24. Ya evam veti purusham prakritim cha gunai saha sarvata vatamanopi nasa bhuyo vijayate. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Clear understanding of material nature, the supersoul, the individual soul, and their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. This is a result of knowledge. The purpose of knowledge is to understand distinctly that the living entity has by chance fallen into this material existence. By his personal endeavor and association with authorities, saintly persons, and the spiritual master, he has to understand his position and then revert to spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness by understanding Bhagavad Gita as it is explained by the personality of Godhead. Then it is certain that he will never come again into this material existence. He will be transferred into the spiritual world for a blissful, eternal life of knowledge. Text 25. Dhyanenatmani pashanti kechid atmanam atmana anye sankhena yogena kama yogena chapare. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. That supersoul is perceived by some through meditation, by some through the cultivation of knowledge, and by others through working without fluid desire. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord informs Arjuna that the conditioned soul can be divided into two classes as far as man's search for self-realization is concerned. Those who are atheists, agnostics, and skeptics are beyond the sense of spiritual understanding. But there are others who are faithful in their understanding of spiritual life, and they are called workers who have renounced fruitive results. Those who always try to establish the doctrine of monism are also counted among the atheists and agnostics. In other words, only the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are really capable of spiritual understanding, because they understand that beyond this material nature, there is a spiritual world in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is expanded as the Paramatma, the Supersoul in everyone, the all-pervading Godhead. Of course, there are those who try to understand the Supreme Absolute Truth by cultivation of knowledge, and they can be counted in the second class. The atheistic philosophers analyze this material world into 24 elements, and they place the individual soul as the 25th item. When they are able to understand the nature of the individual soul to be transcendental to the material elements, they are able to understand also that above the individual soul, there is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the 26th element. Thus, gradually, they also come to the standard of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Those who work without fruitive results are also perfect in their attitude. They are given a chance to advance to the platform of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Here it is stated that there are some people who are pure in consciousness and who try to find out the Supersoul by meditation. And when they discover the Supersoul within themselves, they become transcendentally situated. Similarly, there are others who also try to understand the Supreme Soul by cultivation of knowledge. And there are others who cultivate the Hatha Yoga system and who try to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead by childish activities. Text 26. Anye tvavam ajananta Sutvandyebhya upasate tepi chati tarantyeva metyum shruti paranya na. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This verse is particularly applicable to modern society, because in modern society, there's practically no education in spiritual matters. Some of the people may appear to be atheistic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there's no knowledge of philosophy. As for the common man, if he is a good soul, then there is a chance for advancement by hearing. The hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, gave great stress to hearing, because if the common man simply hears from authoritative sources, he can progress, especially according to Lord Chaitanya. If he hears the transcendental vibration, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It is stated, therefore, that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age, no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. One should learn to become the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. If one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization, and follow in his footsteps, he will be gradually elevated to the position of a pure devotee. In this verse, particularly, the process of hearing is strongly recommended, and this is very appropriate. Although the common man is often not as capable as so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Text 27. Yava sanjayate kinchit sattvam stavara jangamam sheta shetagya samyogat tad vidi bharata sabam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. O chief of the Bharatas, whatever you see in existence, both moving and unmoving, is only the combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Both material nature and the living entity, which were existing before the creation of the cosmos, are explained in this verse. Whatever is created is but a combination of the living entity and material nature. There are many manifestations like trees, mountains, and hills, which are not moving, and there are many existences which are moving, and all of them are but combinations of material nature and superior nature, the living entity. Without the touch of the superior nature, the living entity, nothing can grow. Therefore, the relationship between matter and nature is eternally going on, and this combination is effected by the Supreme Lord. Therefore, he is the controller of both the superior and inferior natures. The material nature is created by him, and the superior nature is placed in this material nature, and thus all these activities and manifestations are taking place, or take place, right? Text 28. Samam sabeshu bhuteshu tisthantam parameshwaram vinashyatva vinashyantam yapashyati sapashyati. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. One who sees the supersoul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the supersoul is ever destroyed, actually sees. Report by Srila Prabhupada. Anyone who can see three things, the body, the proprietor of the body or individual soul, and the friend of the individual soul combined together by good association, is actually in knowledge. Those who are not associated with the soul's friend are ignorant. They simply see the body. And when the body is destroyed, they think that everything is finished. But actually, it is not so. After the destruction of the body, both the soul and the supersoul exist, and they go on eternally in many various moving and unmoving forms. The Sanskrit word Parameshwaram is sometimes translated as the individual soul because the soul is the master of the body. And after the destruction of the body, he transfers to another form. In that way, he is master. But there are others who interpret this Parameshwaram to be the supersoul. In either case, both the supersoul and the individual soul continue. They are not destroyed. One who can see in this way can actually see what is happening. Text 29. Samam pashyam hi sarvatra samavastitam ishwaram nahi nasyatman atmanam tato yati param gatim. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. One who sees the supersoul in every living being and equal everywhere does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. Support by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity, by accepting his material existence as just so much suffering, can become situated in his spiritual existence. If one understands that the Supreme is situated in his Paramatma manifestation everywhere, that is, if one can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every living thing, he does not degrade himself, and he therefore gradually advances in the spiritual world. His mind is generally addicted to self-centered processes. The mind is generally addicted to self-centered processes, but when the mind turns to the supersoul, one becomes advanced in spiritual understanding. Text 30. Prakriti vacha karmani kriyamanani sarvasha yapashati tatatmanam akar taram sapashati. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The body is made by material nature under the direction of a supersoul, and whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not his doing. Whatever one is supposed to do, either for happiness or for distress, one is forced to do because of the bodily constitution. The self, however, is outside all these bodily activities. This body is given according to one's past desires. To fulfill desires, one is given a body with which he can act accordingly, or with which he acts accordingly. Practically speaking, the body is a machine designed by the Supreme Lord to fulfill desires. Because of desires, one is put into difficult circumstances to suffer or to enjoy. This transcendental vision of the living entity, when developed, makes one separate from bodily activities. One who has such a vision is an actual seer. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you. As you're reading this last verse, it's pretty deep because the translation itself says one who can see that all activities are performed by the body and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. I had to read that 3 times to really see how deep that was. Thank you for reading these verses. Have a very small group, so would like to ask devotees if any questions, any comments, any add-ons, reflections, please do unmute yourself and share your thoughts. There's one question that I have, and probably we can go back to verse 13, chapter 13, verse 24, and this one. In the beginning of the sentence, Srila Prabhupada used what is clear understanding. Can you shed some light on what does it mean to have a clear understanding?
Well, the text itself, the translation says, one who understands this philosophy concerning the material nature, the living entity, and interaction of modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again in the material world, regardless of his present position. Clear understanding of the material nature, the super soul, the individual soul, and their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. So the clear understanding, first, Srila Prabhupada in his purport has listed the entities: material nature, the super soul, and individual soul. That's us. Anyone in the material world that's alive has a body and an individual soul in the body, the heart area, and the super soul also in the heart area. Now, so that person who understands that and understands how they relate, these 3 relate to each other, becomes liberated. So what is the clear understanding? Part of it is, or we'll just say as much as possible as Guru Maharaj allowed me to, the material nature is the one that is acting. The material nature itself cannot act without consciousness. Consciousness comes from the individual soul. The individual soul. But the individual soul cannot do anything either unless the super soul permits. So the super soul, Krishna, in that particular expansion, is the one that monitors and supervises what goes on and allows the individual soul's activity with the body to go on. The activities with the body to go on. The difference is when we go to the spiritual world, we don't have these physical bodies anymore. And now it's the soul in its pure sense, that is in its pure form, that is serving the servants who are the servants of the Supreme Lord. But here, people are trying to lord it or control material nature. And so there's a physical body based on the person's desires, and then the soul is not acting. So the soul is not acting. In the spiritual world, the soul acts. In the material world, it's just situated, and it only gives consciousness. The body is a one with the senses. And the super soul is the mercy of the Lord, following the individual soul, whatever body they get into, and tries to bring the individual soul's conscience back to the transcendental. And so that's why the translation is one who understands this philosophy. And the fact is, you're going to be suffering with this physical body, no matter what kind of consciousness you have. If you turn to Krishna consciousness, you will get liberation, get out of this material body, and don't use it anymore, and not come to material work anymore. That's the translation, actually.
It's pretty deep. Pretty deep. It's pretty deep. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Because just thinking about the word or the phrase "clear understanding" is to me, it sounds like we have to be so clear, like crystal clear, to really see our purpose as the soul, spirit soul, and to really see how the nature, plays within our lives, and then to see the super soul. Yeah.
We have a choice. That's why we're in the marginal energy. We have a choice. And without consciousness, Krishna is not going to force us. The loving personality wants us to go back, but we have a choice of what we want, because we're sitting in the material energy with a body with the kind of consciousness that can act in a certain way. But if we act for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to listen, chant, and obey his instructions and serve him, then we are putting ourselves in a situation where we get out of this deal and not come back. And that is what Prabhupada is trying to get across to us. And that's what Krishna is also trying to get across to us through Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. We're very, very deep, I have to say, really deep. Yes. Another question that I have, in the first verse that you read, I think it was verse 33, where Srila Prabhupada says
23. Okay, 23. Go ahead.
23, yes. Sorry, 23, right? He says within and without, right? The super soul, Krishna is always trying to get to us from within and from without. And sometimes, human nature, we have this difficulty to differentiate, especially from without. I think, who, is that Krishna or is that Maya? How do we differentiate? That is the, if I'm making sense here, that is.
Krishna is helping us from within and without. Bhagavad Gita has been spoken by Krishna. So that particular book, the representation of Krishna, can be read like we're doing now, can be read and the instructions taken. That's from without. Within is the soul with the super soul. And the super soul also instructs from within, trying to get the intelligence to have us do what the right thing is. That comes from within, to straighten the mind, because the mind wants to accept and reject just for sense gratification. But the intelligence says, do you stand to gain spiritually from what you're doing? Is it beneficial? Is it at least the mode of goodness for what you're doing? If it isn't, there is a price that you're going to pay, even though you will be allowed to do it. because there's no stopping the individual from doing what they want to do if that they have that particular desire. But there's also what's right and what's wrong. And the super soul helps the individual soul in that sense through the intelligence of the intelligence in the subtle body. But how the final decisions are made by the person, the soul, which has the individual small amount of free choice, of free will. And the free will makes us do or not do according as we like, but we're still guided about what's right and what's wrong. And then the best guidance is the fact that we are not in here. This is not our home. We're not in here to enjoy. Our service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is what gives us joy. That's what's done in the spiritual world. And if we prepare ourselves based on instructions given in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, then we can actually go back home where there's no anxiety and everything is much, much, much easier to perform. Living a life of bliss, eternality,
Absolutely.
yeah, and knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, for sharing that, because so important how we really, read these beautiful instructions by Srila Prabhupada, how to make our life simple, not make it so complicated. Thank you for reading that. Because there are no questions, we thank you all for joining us. Thank you for reading these verses. And it's definitely getting deeper. I can feel that as we are slowly inching into the depth of the sea here. That's how it feels like. Thank you so much. And we thank you all for joining us. Vancha Krapatibhyas cha, Kripa Sindhu Beva cha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Thank you, everybody.
Have a wonderful evening. Hari Bol.
Jai. Hare Krishna.